Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much, Stefan, for the invitation and to Pro Light and Sound to shining the light on a subject that I believe is absolutely important, especially in this ecosystem that brings together pioneers, extremely powerful and new technology, but also content creators. Unfortunately, we don't shine the light enough on content creators. And without content, well, the technology goes nowhere. So today I will talk about the power of sound, but mostly pay more attention as for how important it is to utilize this amazing technology that's out there, talking about the 360 spatial design, for example, and amazing speakers that have been deployed by different of our partners right now through amazing venues like the Sphere of MSG that is in Las Vegas right now, and we'll tap on that a little bit more later. But mostly what I want to shine the light on is, again, this opportunity we have to create content that not only utilizes the new tech, but first and foremost, that helps us to create content that can entertain, but also help people to transform and to heal. Sound is powerful, and we know that. And sound, as amazing as it is, even when we gather people in festival, even when we bring people to nightclub, has somehow in the last couple of years taken a step back. As much as we use sound and music as the main purpose of bringing people together, suddenly the light shows, the effects, and trust me, I'm part of that generation that helped push all of that forward. But only to realize and wake up one day and saying, wait a minute, are we missing the point here? The real reason why we want to bring people together is to utilize this moment in time to help them to release themselves, to dance, to connect with their emotion. And that is what sound can allow us to do. The power of music, there's nothing more powerful than that. To reconnect with the force of what sound and music is as energy, and to start treating it and respecting it the way that it deserves to, is what I believe all of us in this ecosystem should be called to do in many and in our own way, but also in many possible amazing ways. A little bit more about myself. As you know, I've been working in Las Vegas for the past 30 years of my life. I got brought there almost like a surprise in my life. I never thought that would happen, but I became part of the movement that brought the dance music movement basically in Las Vegas and on the West Coast of the United States. That all happened around 2008, and at that time, Las Vegas was mostly recognized for having shows like the Cirque du Soleil or for gambling, but suddenly the nightclub industry just took over. Yes, it was way beyond time and way past due when we compare to Europe. But at that moment in time, it changed the entire world of Vegas. And it really brought that new concept of bringing production that would feature music that would get people together inside four walls and allowing us, such as myself, to create spectacles that would be inspired by really elevating those possibilities of perhaps pushing forward productions. I had a chance to work with the main and most incredible artists, from the Tiestos to the Van Dyke, to having amazing opportunities to work also with celebrities and different singers like Rihanna, Coldplay, work with the Olympics, with Disney. My call to action as a person has always been to kind of shake the models. It's always been about how can we mix match as many different ingredients to create something so different and unique that it might resonate with people that never felt a calling. So with that perspective, I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity of opening the mega clubs in Vegas and to really play as much as I can with that different dynamic of exploring, and always by being driven by sound, exploring through visual spectacles, with costumes, with light, with the effects, with the multimedia, with performers. How can we bring people on the journey where they can let go, forget about their problems for a minute, and then really reset themselves? But one day, as I was actually watching one of the shows we were producing, I started feeling that this intention that we had again of just, providing for a couple of hours this opportunity for people to reset and release from their issues and just be entertained, that we might be missing basically the real call to action. And that had to do again with perhaps putting a filter in front of what I felt was the most important thing, which is again to recognize that everybody's there for the music. It felt like the music was the last player and the last ingredients in a magic potion. Everybody was having a good time, but nobody felt like they were coming together. And that's really where I started asking myself the question. The nightlife industry, especially on the West Coast of America, had become much more of an industry that wanted to capitalize on selling bottles of alcohol than caring about putting people together inside four walls and having them just feel and meet random humans, not based on who they were socially, the size of their wallet, or X other reason why we wouldn't allow them to meet. And that started to bother me because I've always been somebody of integrity and somehow I felt I was trapped in this system that I had been very excited about being part of for a minute, but suddenly it just didn't feel right. So I started asking myself a lot of questions for my, what is my career path? Where do I go from here? And as all of that was happening, I was also going through a lot personally. And at that moment in time, I didn't know how to get out of my own way. A lot of people were telling me, start meditating, start doing this and that. And I'm not somebody, unfortunately, who can sit down in silence. I always have a mini DJ in my head. I always need something happening. So that just wasn't my calling. Then, alcohol and the whole shebang, that also was not part of the journey. And I really felt lost. And at that moment in time, I have good friends of mine that started pulling me into sound meditation, mostly curated by tribes, and specifically the Uniqueen from the Amazon in Brazil. Sitting for 3 days with this tribe, with the shaman in place, and receiving music, basically, not just through the channeling of hearing, but first and foremost, through your entire body, was something that I started recognizing as the days went on, and as I could start feeling my connection with sound and music in a different way. There's a lot of instruments that tribes and even our ancestors were using and have been using and are still using that are meant to connect with specific parts of our bodies. It has nothing to do with hearing. It has to do with listening. And I have to say that I didn't think that that would literally answer my question as for solving my professional, major midlife crisis, but it did. Because suddenly this intention I had in my career of finding the ways to help people reconnect with music and sound was something that as a person was experimenting, as I was going through this transformative and beautiful reconnection with sound and music. Sound is particular. Sound frequencies can be looked at as nutrients. When we're really in carency, for example, of specific nutrients, let's say that you wake up one morning and you just have that need of drinking an orange juice, your body associates basically that carence of vitamin C to the fact that that orange juice has vitamin C. So you're not going to be sent out a message today, you're out of vitamin C, please do something about it. Your brain and your mind and your body is going to work something out, and all it's going to send you is please have orange juice. And you will if you listen to yourself. Now, the same thing can happen with sound and music when we think about it. When you're in a carence of a specific frequency that can literally help reset yourself, unconsciously, you might be craving a specific type of music or a specific track that you recognize, that you're not going to analyze, but you're just going to put it on. I'll give you an example. When during the pandemic, obviously we all went through it, and I was having a lot of rough time. I would wake up sometimes, and for hours, the only song I wanted to put on was a track from Wham, George Michael, back in the days, for those of us that are a little bit older than. And, very, very dynamic, very explosive, extremely uplifting. And I would just put it on repeat, just on repeat, repeat, repeat. And at one point, you're like, what is up with that track? So now recognizing that at that moment in time, the carence I had was that energy. I just needed something to help pick myself up. And I thought that concept was so interesting that, wanting to understand a little bit more the ABCs, and if that had been studied, I decided to enroll in music therapy. And then my entire life changed. Because music obviously has been used, as some of us know, through medical field. And a lot of people, I think, associate any use of music or sound when it gets down to therapy as being holistic practices. Just like the example I had given with, sitting with tribes and everything. No judgment here, but obviously a lot of people say, okay, let's go, girl, But the truth is, it goes beyond that. Regardless that we have or not sat, down with tribes, nobody can say that if you sit next to a gong, they hit the gong, that you're not gonna feel it inside your body. Just like if we go to a nightclub, and I don't know about you, but I love doing that, and you put your hands on a speaker, or that there's subs and suddenly you sit on it or whatsoever, you will feel the music. So the whole concept right now of connectivity with sound, with music, with the understanding that our body can be craving also a specific song, can be craving specific frequency, is something that I started being very, very interested with, in. I don't come here today as necessarily an expert with a PhD that endorses everything, but I'm sharing my pure experience about it and what I've been through different channels, different studies, different experiences, kind of putting together with the intention of starting conversation. There's a rippling effect here of understanding of how we should and could receive sound and music that goes beyond perhaps what we think. I truly believe that by opening ourselves and thinking that the entire body is set up to receiving sound, that not only we can benefit even more from it, because as we know, sound and music being basically sound that's being architecturally designed in an art form to help us release emotion or connect or bring us on a journey. All of that, when we push it through that tiny little hole that is called our hearing, makes it very limited as for really receiving all the beautiful benefits from its virtues. When we connect with sound and music, and that has been studied through the musical channel of music therapy, we can help ourselves psychologically, emotionally. We can help reduce our blood pressure. We can help basically our stress level to really reset itself. We can reanimate the power of imagination. When was the last time that we closed our eyes and just listened to music and let go for a minute? That's all very important for us. We're in a society that's been overloaded by multisensual stimulation, and very rarely do we take a step back to recognize that as much as society wants us to be robots, we're not. And this reconnection with ourselves through sound, through this moment in time that we can take to really intake through our entire body all that beautiful energy and that magical synergy, is something that we need to stay human. I invite you right now to do a little exercise that is something that I took for granted, but that made me realize also how important it is to understand how sound can affect us in so little time. The power of sound wave through our body, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, and to receive it through our body or transfer it through our body, can be done literally through our little instrument here. So for all of us, especially people that are a little jet lagged, that's really good to do. Just humming 5 minutes a day, regardless that you do it with the sound of a hum, regardless that it's done through the power of perhaps doing meditation, regardless that you're in the shower humming your favorite tune, just 5 minutes of humming sends to your body the information that the same thing that happens when we touch basically like, subs or speakers, and that we're transferring through our body all the sound waves, that same phenomenon of relaxation in an instant, of resetting, of reactivating ourselves, or even touching and massaging our organ can happen. Now, sound waves travel faster in water than in air, about 4 times faster. Depending on your source, 4.7, but that's debatable. When we think about what happens when we put our, literally our hands on a speaker, sound waves literally travel through our body. The reason being, we're made of water, 70%. If you think that, your best massager that massages you on your point and the nuts is like the best person on the planet, forget about it. Because sound waves, when it's transferred to your body and can travel through your body, can give you the deepest massage in your organs, what is absolutely not possible to do with the human touch. And that is why the power of sound through the channeling of haptic devices that right now are being deployed in specific venues or that are being explored, the research to back this up is extremely important because it can really help us at many levels, again, on physical, psychological levels, to learn how to reset ourselves with the power and with a tool that is accessible, that is free, and that everybody, depending on your, not even depending, but it's basically international. Doesn't matter who you are, where you're coming from, sound and music is accessible. So again, to go back to that example of humming, we're all gonna do this together. I'm gonna count to 3. On 3, all we have to do is gonna be hum. I'm not even gonna tell you what key to do, just do whatever feels right. If you feel uncomfortable, close your eyes, nobody's looking at you, trust me, and you will feel better. So we're gonna try. Inhaling, 1, 2, 3, and hum. Who did it? Now, did you feel the vibrations here? Imagine, again, doing and feeling this through your entire body every single time that there's a sound system set up in a venue, that you're sitting down somewhere at a coffee shop. Imagine that your body is always being activated in a beautiful way so that you're not only hearing, but you're listening. Now, of course, there's different dosage of that we want to take in, and that is where my next comment comes along, with how important it is as content providers and creators to pay attention to this. If we can make our entire body resonate because we're made of water, to tap on frequencies of sound that might be a little bit too harsh might create a tsunami inside of us. Now, for those of us that, went through phases, or maybe some of us are still loving heavy metal or very hardcore dance music and all, it's great. However, very little are the chances that when you get out of concert, of listening to this, that you feel calm and at peace. You're gonna feel anxious. You're gonna feel a little bit like, woo, okay, I need a minute, And that's very, very simple. You literally been activated, your water inside of you, because of all those short and very intense sound waves that, were transferred to your body, are literally making the movement inside of you so harsh that it's affecting your mind, that it's affecting your body, that it's making you a little bit dizzy. Unlike if we listen, for example, to classical music and we're receiving those frequencies, Well, then, it's a nice river with a nice flow. It's calm. It's going to help you to be peaceful. And it's funny because as a kid, I always wondered why people love classical music. I didn't get it. And then eventually I understood. It's like this calmness and this sense of just being balanced comes with it. There's much more to it, obviously, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be listening to specific type of music or not, but it's important to recognize it. And that brings me to another issue, a very, very important issue, which is noise pollution. Going back again to the sensibility we have of being activated by frequencies that might really shake us up. Every single day right now, we're being bombarded by sounds and we're taking it in. We're not reacting. We're in a society right now that is absolutely being affected on so many levels because of sound pollution. Most nightclubs do not respect at all those laws that are established. Anything over 85 decibels should never be intaken for more than 8 hours. Every time you go 3 over, you have to basically cut by half the amount of time you should be exposed to those frequencies. That's very, very, very important to remember when we create content, because it's not about being louder anymore. When we start understanding that listening is with our entire body, shouldn't we then recognize that just pumping up the volume and hearing it through our ears and affecting our hearing health is something that we cannot admit anymore? We have this possibility by starting to, put more emphasis again into content creation, into how spatial sound design also is created, but mostly positioned. But then as content provider, it's also our job to recognize what type of frequencies we should emit, some that are heard, not heard, at what level should they be also projected so that we don't raise the level of anxiety inside people. 1 out of 4 people by 2050 are going to be literally suffering from hearing health issues. That's 2.5 billion humans. And just when we think that it's mostly for older people, it's really not. We're talking about people under the age of 30 years old that are right now being the most effective, and kids are the #1 people that are being affected by it. The reason, literally the misunderstanding of how to use anything that we put in our ears. It's literally due to volume of music and sound through our hearing. So with that in mind, there's a call to action that I have with beautiful spaces that exist right now, with amazing technology that's being deployed, and God knows that it's not over. Shouldn't it be the time that we also start kind of creating a bridge between what we might call holistic practices, but still recognizing that our ancestors and tribes all over the world are really and have been using sound and music in ways to really help elevate us and really help us understand how to connect through our entire body with those different frequencies. And then shouldn't it be time to also bring and create this other bridge with the science of sound, so that we can intake some of that information and also insert it into the content that we're creating. And then, of course, we always want to do this with the optic of entertaining people. It's not about, creating giant sound bath and that everybody has to be set at a specific mode or that there's only one tone. No. Let's create tracks. Let's create music. Let's create unique concepts that are sonically designed not only to entertain, but have that sensibility of also being received by the entire body instead of only our hearing. So with that in mind, I hope I inspired you to at least ask yourself some questions. I'll be more than happy to answer some also. And like I said, this is really about creating a domino effect. It's about bringing together some ideas, some concepts that are out there, and really about helping and starting to invest more in content creators so that we can be even more educated, that there can be even more research done, so that every time that we deliver an experience that is showcased via amazing technology that surrounds us, that we make sure that we're not triggering our audience in a negative way. That we make sure that we're using sound and respecting our audience and spectators enough that we want them to have the most amazing experience, but we also want to elevate that experience by bringing in some of that knowledge that our ancestors, that the medical field, that the science of sound, and just that our own personal judgment can also be taken. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jen.
Thank you.
We have so much time for questions. So raise your hand, ask some questions, or think about a question and ask it in a minute after I'm done with mine. So I think if I break it down into my very simplistic terms, there's two fields of application from the things you talk about. Your standard venue and event, and just really going into details of what the sound experience is like, whether we can cut some frequencies. And then there's the field where we use sound purposely for a healing or for a well-being experience, right?
Yeah, it's really the crossover of both. And I like that you brought up that first example, because actually we were just talking about that earlier, where when we go to restaurants today, very rarely do we go to restaurants anymore and that you can even hear yourself talk. Even the hip restaurants, and they're playing that dance music and everything. There's amazing studies that came out in regards to that, about how when we're over bombarded by not just sound, but when we're overstimulated in a sensorial way, taking again the example of restaurants, suddenly our sense of taste goes down. Because we're overstimulating the hearing. There's no way that I can appreciate as much the taste of what I'm eating. So if you pay attention to, like, going, for example, if you go to a Michelin star restaurant or French cuisine or whatever, very rarely, I was surprised. I went to a restaurant not long ago where there was absolutely no music. And it took me an hour to recognize it, but suddenly I was like, maybe that's why it's so good. It's very, very interesting. So we're in a world again and going back to nightclubs, especially the way it's operated, like on the...
So depending on the level of your chef in the kitchen, you want a high or a low noise level, sort of.
Depending on how much you want to sell too, exactly. But
that's a fact that blew my mind, but I think it's not news in this setting with this audience, is that our ear obviously can make out patterns down to, I think, 25 thousandths of a second. Our eye just 10 thousandths of a second. So we're really, really receptive to everything that's going on an audio level. But I guess in surroundings like a restaurant, nobody really pays attention to that.
Right.
Which makes it a really fatiguing environment.
Until we do, though. That's the thing. Until we... again, I don't appreciate when people take for granted the customers. And that's something that I think should never be thought of in a process of deciding how an experience should be deployed. Everything should be thought of. If it's an experience about food, culinary, then let's put the emphasis on that, and let's make sure to let go of our other senses so that we can really focus on that one. And the same thing goes, again, going back to sound. I have an experience that, right now we're in development that will probably be deployed by the summer, where it's a full body listening experience. And when we were prototyping it, so many times when people would do it, we put an eye mask on and headphones, and then it's an entire haptic, devices that are activated. Most people, when you would try, why isn't there VR? I was like, well, you're not getting the idea. The whole concept is for you to let go of this for a minute and just surrender to it. we have more and more issues at that. It's very hard for us. We're so like over again, stimulated all the time. Then to take a minute to really just let in the information that music and sound has to give us, just for 5 minutes, can change everything in our body.
I'm glad you brought up that example, because you mentioned the sphere earlier in your beginning. Those who do not know, the sphere is this gigantic installation in Las Vegas. I think it's 112 meters high, 180 wide, this super immersive audio sound, even with wind and smell immersion. But you work exactly on the other end. You created an installation called The Hum that is only for one single person. I think it's around probably 10 feet high, and it's really a fully immersive experience that has a profound effect, I read. I heard in one of your podcasts that you really described it's only 5 minutes long, but people seem to really have an emotional experience while being so deeply immersed into those frequencies.
Yes, the idea with The Hum came with the concept of creating something so accessible again, and that would basically appeal to the mass. Like the visual of the first one we deployed at South by Southwest 2 years ago was literally a 10 feet tall, gigantic Buddha-esque purple, art piece. And I literally created for my mom, because my mother had a lot of health issues, cancers, and I kept on wanting her to come maybe to sunbath. And every time I would do work with tribes, I wish she was here, but there's no way that woman is going to step into anything that she would call spiritual or this and that. So I'm like, well, let's make it a Disneyland attraction. I was like, look, here's a beautiful installation, now sit on it. And she did. And from then on, the whole concept is literally to make this the most effective way to plant the seed. It's 5 minutes, we sit, we're brought onto this journey where we connect with the heartbeat of the earth, to then being surrounded by all those animals in the jungle, and we literally release people in space. So there's a real journey that's created only with sound. It's 360 and also 360 immersive
and only in
the
5
body.
minutes?
Only 5 minutes, but some people think it's 30. Yeah, depending on where they're at, yeah.
Before I go on with my questions, are there any questions in the audience? Be daring. Use the opportunity to talk one of the pioneers in the field. Anybody here? No? All right, well, yes, there is one. Awesome. Yes.
A part of my work is live sound engineer. So, and my question is, do you know or are you aware of special frequencies connected to special emotions? So I'm looking for the perfect live sound in this way.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, because and I'm trying to be careful and I love that you asked this question, because there's one thing that I've learned through, especially the channeling of tapping and music therapy and everything, that music and sound is such a personal call. So there are specific frequencies that, again, some people would want to dive in and say, yes, this frequency is the frequency of the heart, and mostly are connected with the chakras. If you're a believer in the holistic possibility of treating yourself through sound, frequencies and chakras, then that I would say is a great way to go, because I believe that the power of the mind really helps also with the understanding of what it can do. But it's something that I think, and I would invite you to test with your own sense of what feels right for you as well. Specific type of music can really curate and help specific type of people to get back on their feet, unlike others that might be, this is not my calling. And it really goes, ironically, by mostly generations as well. But with that said, I mean, sound frequencies is still a touchy thing, but music that combines frequencies, that's where there's much more to it. And there's more studies also that have been done to it. So the different cues and the different type of keys that it's in have more effects or more studies backing it up than saying that a specific frequency would change your life. But that being said, that's my calling of life. I want to find that ultimate frequency. So we'll talk. we'll find it together.
So basically also what you were asking for, if you could do some involuntary therapy to whatever live audience you have in front of you by mixing in some. Sounds okay. Are there more questions in the audience? Please, be daring. This is your opportunity. Well, if not, we'll leave it to private conversations. I think Jen will be here for a couple more minutes, so make sure to approach her directly and talk to her. I can also recommend checking out her website. You have a really cool website, I must say. I loved looking around on it. And she also left a nice trail in the Rolling Stone magazine. I already picked up some useful things, because earlier you mentioned that you love to listen to that song of Wham! To pick you up with that energy.
Yes.
But what was interesting
the
is
principle,
the ESO principle. Yes.
Yeah, the favorite. Actually, might as well give the trick if we have some time. So one of my favorite practice and technique through music therapy is called the ESO principle, and it has been used actually for even women that are delivering kids in the delivery room to pre-plan basically playlists that will match your mood, and that starts where you're at, but can elevate, or if you're super stressed out, can help you to come back to like the basics. So the best example that I love to use, I have no shame to sharing about myself since it's been published, basically. I'm somebody that I always struggle with waking up. I mean, once I'm up, after an hour, I'm good, and then I never want to go to bed. But, thank you, nightclubs. But the mornings are just terrible for me, and it's always been like that. As a kid, it took me hours. My poor mother was like, let's go. So the ESO principle makes it that I can set different playlists that will match my mood, and within, let's say, 30 minutes, by setting up perhaps 3, 4, 5 tracks, depending on where you want to go, you listen to those tracks. Like an example was High Hopes of Pink Floyd. That sometimes is the first track I'm going to listen to when I wake up, because that's how I feel. And that music, obviously that song, if some of you know it, it's there's no beats really in it, there's no drums, it's very esoteric in a way, but it keeps you where you're at. It just matches where I'm at, and it somehow unlocks, and that's where the principle comes in, that it can unlock emotions inside of you that you might not even know are locked. And then after listening to that song, suddenly you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm feeling a little better. So then what is that next track that's gonna match that next layer? And you can go up the ladder until you finish with Wham, obviously, But that same idea can come to preset yourself if you're the type of person that needs a coffee at 4 p.m. because you're crashing. You can preset yourself with music that can give you that same type of energy. And you can, if you know your crash is about to happen, at 3:30, you can start listening to those very high tempo tracks, and for 10-30 minutes, that might not, but should put you in a mood where you don't necessarily need that coffee. Same thing goes if you're going to a stressful event or meeting. You can start again 30 minutes before going to your meeting, something that's going to be a little bit more animated, a little bit more energized, and then you slowly bring it down, and it matches your mood. So it's something that I really encourage everybody to try, because I have to say it's pretty spectacular, the effects, and one of the most important principles that's been studied and used in hospitals for the past 20 years.
I love that. ISO effect or principle.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get rid of my second coffee in the day, so that'll be one of my hacks, I think. Thanks so much for joining us today.
You're more than welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Big round of applause.